Paul Newman, the WW2 pilot who found humanity amid the chaos of war in the early morning light of a small English village in 1942, a question hung thick in the air, as heavy as the fog that draped over the rolling green fields. What does it mean to be human in a world torn apart by war? The quiet of the village was often punctuated by the distant rumble of aircraft overhead and the occasional echo of sirens warning of incoming danger. This was a place where daily life continued under the shadow of conflict, where children played in the dirt streets, unaware of the horrors that loomed just beyond their horizon. The remnants of peace were being eroded by the steady drumbeat of war, with posters plastered on the walls urging men to enlist and rationing cards tucked into the pockets of mothers trying to provide for their families. Amidst this backdrop of uncertainty and fear, a young pilot named Paul Newman stood at the edge of the airfield, his heart racing with a mixture of pride and dread. At 24, he was part of the Royal Air Force, donning his uniform with an idealism that had not yet been tarnished by the realities of combat. His chestnut hair was tousled by the brisk wind, and his striking blue eyes reflected the boundless sky above, a stark contrast to the turmoil that surrounded him. Paul had just returned from a mission, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, but even amidst the victory of a successful sortie, he found little solace. The weight of the world pressed down on him, a constant reminder of the lives he was expected to take in the name of freedom. The roar of engines and the scent of oil filled the air, but what lingered in his mind were the faces of those he had left behind, the innocent lives caught in the crossfire of a war that felt increasingly senseless. As he turned away from the airfield, his thoughts drifted to Clara Thompson, a volunteer nurse whose gentle spirit had captivated him since the moment they met. Clara, at 22, seemed to embody hope in a time of despair. With her auburn hair pulled back and her apron stained with the remnants of her work, she moved through the makeshift hospital with grace, tending to the wounded with a compassion that brought light to the darkest of rooms. The two had forged a bond that transcended the chaos of their surroundings. Their conversations, often held in the quiet corners of the hospital or during brief moments of respite, were filled with dreams of a future unmarred by conflict. Clara had a way of seeing beyond the uniforms and ranks, reminding Paul that there were still lives to be saved, still humanity to be found, even in the depth of despair. But as Paul approached the hospital that day, he couldn't shake the nagging fear that had settled in his gut. Clara's laughter echoed in his mind, but so did the reality of the war-torn landscape outside. The thought of her in danger weighed heavily on him, and he felt a growing conflict within, his duty to his country pulling him in one direction, while his heart urged him to protect the innocent. "Paul!" Clara's voice broke through his reverie, pulling him back to the present. She stood at the entrance of the hospital, her eyes wide with concern. "You're back. I was worried about you." A smile crept onto Paul's face as he approached her, the warmth of her presence dispelling some of his darker thoughts. "I'm all right, just another day in the sky. What about you? How are the patients?" Clara's expression shifted, her brow furrowing slightly. "We've had a surge of wounded today. The bombing raids are intensifying, and it's taking a toll on everyone here." Her voice was steady, but Paul could hear the tremor beneath it. "They don't understand what they're doing," he said, the anger simmering just below the surface. "They're fighting for control while innocent people are suffering." Clara stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his forearm. "I know, Paul. But you must remember, every life you save up there matters. You're doing your part, even if it doesn't always feel like it." Paul looked down at her hand, feeling the warmth radiate from her touch. It was a grounding force in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. "What if my part means causing more suffering? What if I'm just perpetuating the cycle?" She searched his eyes, her own filled with empathy. "You're a pilot, yes, but you're also a human being. You have the power to make choices, to remember the people behind the uniforms and the missions. That's what makes you different." Her words struck a chord deep within him, igniting a flicker of hope amidst the growing shadows of doubt. Yet, the burden of his responsibilities loomed large, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled in two separate directions, one toward duty and the other toward compassion. As they stood there, the distant sound of aircraft engines roared overhead, a reminder of the chaos that continued to swirl around them. Paul's heart raced, torn between the call of duty and the desire to protect those he cared about. He could feel the pressure mounting within him, a storm brewing that threatened to unravel everything he believed in. The world outside was a war zone, but right here with Clara, he found a fleeting sense of peace. Yet, in the back of his mind, he knew that peace was a luxury they could no longer afford. "Clara," he began, the weight of his thoughts spilling out. "After this mission, I think I need to talk to my superiors. I need to find a way to approach this differently. We can't keep ignoring the human cost of our actions." Her eyes widened in surprise, a glimmer of hope igniting within them. "You really mean that?" "I do," he replied, his voice steadying as he felt the resolve harden within him. "We have to do better. For the people we're fighting for, and for ourselves." As Clara nodded, a flicker of understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that lay ahead. The chaos of war was ever present, but amid the destruction, they were determined to find humanity, to cling to hope, and to seek a path that honored both duty and compassion. The world outside continued to turn, with the weight of conflict pressing down on their shoulders, but in that moment, they stood together, united by a shared vision of what could be. Paul knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but with Clara by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in the skies above and the lives below. Their story was just beginning, and in a world overshadowed by war, they were determined to find their way back to humanity. In the days that followed, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily upon Paul. Each day began earlier and ended later, a cycle of anticipation and anxiety that left little room for rest. The sounds of engines roaring in the distance became a constant reminder of the missions that loomed ahead. His heart raced at the thought of flying into enemy territory, a reality that filled him with dread, yet also a sense of purpose. But the line between duty and humanity was becoming increasingly blurry. One cloudy afternoon, Paul found himself in the makeshift briefing room at the airbase, the cold concrete walls echoing with the voices of his fellow pilots. Maps were spread across the table, and pins marked enemy positions like ominous stars on a dark canvas. The atmosphere was tense, a palpable mixture of bravado and fear. "Listen up," barked Squadron Leader Harris, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We have a new mission. A humanitarian drop over a village in occupied territory. Supplies for the civilians. It's a risky operation, but we've been tasked to help those who need it most." Paul's heart sank as he exchanged glances with Jack, who stood beside him, arms crossed tightly against his chest. Jack's brow furrowed in concern. "Humanitarian? Or just another excuse to get us closer to the front lines," he muttered under his breath, frustration lacing his words. The briefing continued, but Paul's mind was elsewhere. He envisioned Clara, with her warm smile and compassionate heart, tending to the wounded. He could almost hear her voice, urging him to remember the importance of saving lives, not just taking them. After the meeting, Paul stepped outside, the cool air filling his lungs. He needed to find Clara, to discuss the mission and the reality of what it meant to fly into danger under the guise of goodwill. He walked through the village, each step heavy with the weight of uncertainty. When he arrived at the hospital, the familiar scent of antiseptic and the faint hum of medical equipment greeted him. Clara was at her station, bandaging a soldier's arm with gentle precision. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, but he could see the exhaustion etched on her face. "Paul," she exclaimed, her voice a soothing balm amidst the chaos. "How did the briefing go?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "They're sending us on a mission to drop supplies in a village. It's supposed to be humanitarian." "Humanitarian?" Clara's expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing her features. "That sounds dangerous. You know how close that area is to the front lines." "I know," Paul replied, running a hand through his hair. "But they think it's important to show the civilians that we care." Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But what about the risk, Paul? What if you're put in a situation where you have to choose between following orders and protecting innocent lives?" Paul felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "I don't want to think about that. But what if we could actually help them? What if this is our chance to do something good?" Clara's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "I understand the desire to help, but remember, the line between duty and humanity is thin. You need to stay safe." "I promise I'll be careful," he said, though he knew the promise felt weak against the reality of war. As he left the hospital, Paul's thoughts churned. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. He needed to talk to Jack, to voice his concerns about the mission and the implications of their actions. Later that evening, Paul found Jack in the mechanic's shed, tinkering with an aircraft engine. The familiar clanking of tools and the smell of oil brought him a sense of home. Jack looked up as Paul approached, his face illuminated by the dim light. "Hey, you look like you've seen a ghost," Jack said, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's eating at you?" "I'm worried about this new mission," Paul confessed. "It's not just about dropping supplies. What if we encounter enemy fire? What if we have to make tough choices?" Jack leaned against the workbench, his expression serious. "You know the brass doesn't care about our choices. They want results. Just follow orders, and hope for the best. That's all we can do." "But what if that's not enough?" Paul countered, frustration rising in his voice. "What if we're making things worse by getting involved? I can't just fly over a village and pretend everything is okay if it means putting lives at risk." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get it, I do. But we're soldiers, Paul. That's our job. You can't save everyone." The tension hung in the air, thick and heavy. Paul felt a surge of determination. "Maybe it's time we tried. After this mission, I'm going to speak to our superiors about a different approach. One that prioritizes protecting lives over taking them." Jack's eyes widened in surprise. "You really think that's going to change anything? You'll just put a target on your back." "I have to try," Paul insisted, his voice steady. "If we don't stand up for what's right, who will?" As they spoke, the sounds of the village drifted in through the open doors, laughter mingling with the distant rumble of aircraft. Paul couldn't shake the feeling that the world outside was inching closer to a breaking point, and he felt a growing urgency within himself to act. The next day arrived with an ominous gray sky, casting shadows over the airbase. As the squadron prepared for takeoff, Paul felt a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He watched as the pilots buzzed around, checking their planes and exchanging light-hearted banter to mask their fears. "Ready for another joyride?" Jack teased, trying to lighten the mood as he tightened the straps of his harness. Paul managed a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just hoping we don't have to make any tough choices today." The engines roared to life, and the ground beneath them vibrated with energy. As they ascended into the sky, Paul's heart raced, not just from the thrill of flying but from the weight of his thoughts. He knew that they were flying into a storm, not just of weather, but of moral complexity. As they approached the designated drop zone, the view below began to shift from fields to the stark reality of war-torn land. The village lay beneath them, a patchwork of destruction and despair. Smoke curled from several buildings, a stark reminder of the conflict that raged on. "Deploying supplies in 3, 2, 1, the voice of the squadron leader crackled through the radio. Paul's hands gripped the controls tightly as he prepared for the drop. But as they descended, a sudden alarm blared through the cockpit, jolting him from his focus. "Enemy aircraft spotted." 6 o'clock. Jack's voice cut through the chaos. Panic surged as Paul scanned the sky, spotting the silhouettes of enemy planes approaching. The mission they had prepared for was now overshadowed by an immediate threat. "Take evasive action," the squadron leader ordered, and Paul's instincts kicked in. He pulled the yoke hard, veering the aircraft into a steep dive. The adrenaline coursed through his veins as he maneuvered through the sky, dodging enemy fire. "Drop the supplies," Jack shouted, urgency lacing his voice. "We can't risk getting hit." With a heavy heart, Paul released the supplies, watching as the crates fell towards the village, knowing that their mission was now in jeopardy. The aircraft rocked violently as bullets whizzed past, forcing Paul to focus on their survival. "Hang on," he yelled as he fought against the controls, trying to outmaneuver their pursuers. The chaos around him felt surreal, a whirlwind of noise and confusion. In that moment, he couldn't help but think of Clara and the lives they were supposed to help. Each moment stretched into eternity, and the battle for survival raged on. Paul's mind raced, grappling with the gravity of the situation and the moral implications of their mission. As they fought to evade the enemy, he could only hope that their actions would not lead to further destruction. The conflict within him deepened, and he realized that the true test of his humanity was not just in the skies, but in the choices he would make on the ground. As the fight continued, Paul's resolve solidified. After this mission, he would speak out. He would advocate for a different approach, one that valued life above all else. But for now, survival was the only priority. And as the aircraft soared through the clouds, the battle between duty and humanity raged on within him. If you're invested in Paul's journey and want to witness how his choices unfold in the midst of war, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Join us as we delve deeper into this gripping story of courage, compassion, and the human spirit in the face of chaos. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share what's next. The early morning light filtered through the clouds, casting a muted glow over the English countryside. Paul Newman stood in the cockpit of his aircraft, the rumble of engines vibrating through his body, a constant reminder of the chaos that surrounded him. Today was different. Today was a mission that would test not just his skills as a pilot but the very essence of his humanity. As he tightened his grip on the controls, Paul felt the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him. The orders had come in just the night before, a bombing raid on a target deep in enemy territory. He glanced at his co-pilot, a young man with wide, anxious eyes, who was still trying to process the gravity of their assignment. The image of Clara's worried face flashed through his mind. Would she understand? Would she forgive him if he followed through with the mission? "Hey, Paul," Jack's voice crackled over the radio, pulling him back to the present. "You all right up there?" "Just thinking about the mission," Paul replied, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "What if there are civilians down there?" Jack's laughter came through, light and mocking. "We're not here to play God, mate. Just follow orders, and we'll be fine. Just like always." But today, the thought of just following orders felt like a noose tightening around his neck. As they flew closer to the target, the landscape below transformed into a patchwork of fields and villages. The beauty of it contrasted sharply with the reality of what they were about to do. The radio buzzed again, this time with the voice of their commanding officer. "All units, prepare for the drop. Target is confirmed. Proceed with caution. Remember, we're here to do a job." Paul swallowed hard. "Copy that. Proceeding with caution." But his heart was racing, a knot of dread was forming in his stomach. As they approached the target, the view became clearer. The village below was nestled in a valley, peaceful and unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon it. Paul's breath caught in his throat. The streets were lined with homes, children playing in the dirt, mothers hanging laundry. This was not a military stronghold, this was a community, a life he wasn't prepared to destroy. "Paul, we're in position," Jack said, his voice breaking through the haze of Paul's thoughts. "Ready for the drop?" "Wait," Paul said, his voice trembling. "What if there are civilians? We can't just drop bombs without knowing what's down there." "Those are the orders," Jack insisted, his tone firm. "We're not here to question. We're here to follow orders." But Paul's resolve began to harden. He could not be complicit in the destruction of innocent lives. "I can't do this, Jack. I'm not going to bomb a village full of people." "Paul, you're jeopardizing the mission," Jack shouted, frustration rippling through his voice. "If you don't drop, we'll be held accountable. You'll be court-martialed." In that moment, time seemed to freeze. Paul glanced down at the village, his eyes scanning for signs of life. He could see a group of children playing near a well, their laughter echoing in the air, blissfully unaware of the danger looming overhead. His heart raced, and he knew he had to make a choice that could change everything. "I'm diverting," he said suddenly, his voice firm. "We can't drop. I'm pulling up." "Are you insane?" Jack yelled, panic flooding his voice. "You can't just," Paul yanked the control stick, the aircraft veering sharply away from the target. The sound of alarms blared in the cockpit, a cacophony of warnings that mirrored the turmoil in his heart. He could feel the tension mounting between them, palpable and suffocating. The village was now directly below them, and as they flew over, Paul's heart sank. He could see the smoke rising from the remnants of previous bombings, the echoes of despair that lingered in the air. He had made his choice, but he was acutely aware of the consequences that would follow. "Paul, you will regret this," Jack shouted, fear and anger mingling in his tone. "You're putting us all at risk." "I'd rather face their wrath than live with this on my conscience," Paul replied, steeling himself against the storm brewing in his chest. Suddenly, the aircraft jolted violently, an explosion rocked the tail section, sending the plane spiraling. Jack grasped the instrument panel to steady himself. "What just happened?" "Flak. We're hit," Paul shouted, struggling to regain control. The plane shuddered under the force of enemy fire. "Get us out of here," Jack yelled, panic rising in his voice as he frantically worked the controls. Paul's hands danced over the levers, adrenaline coursing through him. The aircraft was damaged, and they were losing altitude fast. He could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him like a vice. "Hold on. I'm trying to level out." But before he could stabilize the aircraft, another explosion rocked them, and Jack was thrown against the cockpit wall. "Jack!" Paul cried out, his heart clenching with fear. He glanced at his co-pilot, who was slumped over, blood trickling down his forehead. "Stay with me. We need to get out of here." With a fierce determination, Paul fought against the controls, his vision narrowing as he focused on the task ahead. The aircraft was faltering, but he refused to let it go down without a fight. He spotted an open field ahead and aimed for it, praying they could land without crashing. "Brace for impact," Paul shouted, his heart racing as he prepared for the worst. The plane hit the ground hard, skidding across the field, finally coming to a halt in a cloud of dust and debris. Silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of the village. Paul's heart raced as he turned to Jack, who was still unconscious. "Jack! Wake up!" He shook him gently, fear wrapping around him like a cold blanket. Jack stirred but didn't respond. Panic surged through Paul as he scrambled to unbuckle his harness. He had to get Jack out of the plane. With sheer determination, he dragged Jack's limp body from the wreckage. As he pulled him to safety, the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had disobeyed orders, and now they were both in danger. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted his thoughts, and Paul looked up to see villagers emerging from the nearby homes, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and fear. He was in enemy territory, and he had just crashed their enemy's aircraft. "Help!" Paul shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. "He needs a doctor." The villagers hesitated, their eyes darting between the wreckage and the two men. Paul felt a mix of fear and hope. They could either help him or turn against them. Suddenly, a woman stepped forward, her face etched with concern. "Bring him," she said, her voice steady as she gestured for Paul to follow her. "We have a doctor." With no other choice, Paul hoisted Jack over his shoulder and followed her into the village. As they moved deeper into the settlement, he felt the tension of his actions weigh heavily on his shoulders. He had saved lives by diverting the bombing, but now he was a fugitive in a land that once was a target. They reached a small house, and the woman ushered him inside. A doctor rushed to them, a look of urgency in his eyes as he assessed Jack's injuries. Paul stepped back, his heart pounding as he watched them work, helpless but determined to protect his friend. As the doctor worked swiftly, Paul's mind raced. He had diverted from the plan, and now he was facing the repercussions. But something had changed inside him. He realized that humanity existed even in the most dire circumstances. It was in the compassion of the villagers, in the determination of the doctor, and in the sacrifices made for one another. When the doctor finally turned to him, wiping sweat from his brow, Paul felt a glimmer of hope. "He'll be all right, but he needs rest," the doctor said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You should stay here until it's safe." Paul nodded, relief flooding through him, but the weight of his choice remained heavy in his heart. He had acted against orders, and now he would have to face the consequences. But as he looked around at the villagers, he realized he was no longer just a soldier following orders. He was a part of something larger, a fight for humanity amidst the chaos of war. In that moment, he understood that the true cost of war was not just measured in victories or defeats but in the lives touched, lives saved, and lives lost. As he settled into the small home, a new resolve formed within him. He would return to Clara, to Jack, and to his squadron with a story of compassion, a testament to the humanity that still existed even in the darkest of times. The war had changed him, but it would not define him. Paul knew now that he must advocate for a new approach to warfare, one that valued life over destruction, one that acknowledged the humanity in every heart, even in the midst of chaos. The battle was far from over, but he was ready to fight for a different kind of victory. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the small English village, Paul Newman stood at the airfield, his heart heavy yet hopeful. The echoes of war still clung to him, but the weight of guilt he had carried since that fateful mission was beginning to lift. His decision to divert from orders had not only saved innocent lives but had also ignited a fire within him, a desire to advocate for humanity amidst the chaos of conflict. In the aftermath of the mission, Paul and Clara had worked tirelessly together, transforming their shared pain and determination into a force for change. With Jack recovering in the hospital, their conversations had deepened. They discussed the importance of finding ways to protect civilians, to ensure that future missions would take into account the lives of those caught in the crossfire. Their idealism was met with skepticism from some of their peers, but Paul's resolve only grew stronger. Paul's promotion came with both honor and a new set of responsibilities. As a flight commander, he had the platform to voice his beliefs. In meetings with his superiors, he articulated the need for a more humane approach to warfare, one that prioritized saving lives over mere military objectives. It was a delicate balance, one that put him at odds with the chain of command, but he refused to back down. Each time he spoke, he drew on the memories of those he had seen suffering, his voice steady and unwavering. Every pilot wants to do their duty, Paul argued passionately in one meeting, but we must ask ourselves, what is our duty? Is it to destroy our enemies, or is it to protect the innocent? We can't forget that the people we encounter are human beings, just like us. While some of the officers exchanged skeptical glances, Paul noticed others nodding in agreement, their expressions shifting from disbelief to contemplation. Clara, who often accompanied him to these meetings, became his steadfast ally. Together, they organized humanitarian efforts, collaborating with local charities to provide aid to war-torn areas and to support families affected by the conflict. Clara's compassion and unwavering belief in their cousin inspired Paul to push harder, to dream bigger. One evening, as they sorted through supplies in the village hall, Clara looked up at Paul, her eyes shining with a mix of admiration and pride. "You're making a difference, Paul. You're not just a pilot anymore, you're a voice for those who can't speak for themselves." Paul smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I couldn't have done it without you, Clara. You remind me every day why this fight is worth it." Their bond deepened, and in the quiet moments between missions, they shared dreams of a world free from the shackles of war. Clara's laughter filled the air, a sweet melody that broke through the tension that often surrounded them. Paul found solace in her presence, a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity could shine through. As the months rolled on, the tides of war began to shift. With each successful mission that prioritized civilian safety, Paul's reputation grew, as did the support for their humanitarian initiatives. The RAF started to implement strategies that reduced collateral damage, inspired by Paul's unwavering commitment. Although there were still challenges, they saw tangible changes, and for the first time in a long while, hope flickered on the horizon. One day, as they stood at the airfield preparing for a mission together, Paul turned to Clara, his heart swelling with gratitude. "You believed in this, even when I was lost. Thank you for standing by me." Clara smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We've always believed in each other. That's what makes us stronger." With a final embrace, they prepared to board the aircraft. As Paul climbed into the cockpit, he felt a familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins, but this time it was accompanied by a sense of purpose. He was not just flying into battle, he was flying for something greater, a mission to protect the innocent and to bring humanity back into the heart of warfare. The flight was intense, but as they navigated above the clouds, Paul's thoughts drifted to the villagers below, the families, the children, and the lives that hung in the balance. He remembered Jack's laughter, the warmth of Clara's hand in his, and the weight of the world resting on their shoulders. This was not just a fight against enemies, it was a fight for the very essence of life itself. As the aircraft soared over a small town, Paul's heart raced when he spotted movement below. A group of civilians were fleeing a nearby conflict zone, their faces etched with fear. His instincts kicked in, and he made a split-second decision. "We need to warn them," he shouted to his crew. He radioed back to base, requesting that they relay information to the ground forces to prevent further escalation. Paul's heart pounded in his chest, but he felt a sense of clarity. He was no longer just following orders, he was taking charge, using his voice to protect those who needed it most. Upon landing, the relief was palpable. The civilians were saved, and as Paul stepped out of the aircraft, he was greeted by cheers from the villagers who had gathered to thank him. It was a moment of triumph, a symbol of the change he had fought so hard to achieve. Later that evening, as the sun set over the village, Paul and Clara stood together, gazing at the horizon. The world around them had changed, but so had they. Paul had learned that true courage was not just about flying into battle, it was about advocating for humanity, about making choices that reflected compassion over conflict. "Look how far we've come," Clara said softly, her voice filled with wonder. Paul nodded, taking her hand. "And we'll keep going. There's still so much to do, but I know we can make a difference together." With a renewed sense of purpose, they turned to face the future, a future where humanity would prevail, even in the darkest of times. Paul had found his place not just as a pilot but as a guardian of hope, a beacon of light in a world that desperately needed it. As the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Paul and Clara shared a knowing glance. They understood that their journey was far from over. The fight for humanity was an ongoing battle, but they were ready to face it together. If you found inspiration in Paul's journey and the power of compassion, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Did this story resonate with you? If so, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more inspiring narratives, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment of hope in the face of adversity. Together, let's continue to spread the message that even in the darkest times, humanity can shine through. Thank you for watching.